What's up, Flick Connection? This is Darren, and today I want to talk about what makes a movie really great. I happen to think that there's one thing all great movies have in common, but before we get into that, what makes a movie good? There are a lot more good movies than there are great ones, and they all have certain things in common. So what are they? I want to go over 4 key elements that most good movies have. I think to be considered a good movie by most, it's going to have at least 3 of these 4 elements. The first and possibly most obvious is story. Movies are just a form of storytelling, so you have to have a good story. A good film is never made out of a bad script. Sometimes bad movies are made out of good scripts, unfortunately, but you have to start with a good story. So any of the movies that we're talking about that sort of achieved this level of greatness, they at least started with a good story to tell. And then it comes into how is that story told? Is it told in an effective way? So the second of the 4 elements is a little less obvious. In fact, it's one of the more invisible elements we're going to talk about, and that's pacing. Even though pacing is the most invisible, like I said, it can also be the most noticeable when it's done poorly. When pacing is off, you tend to lose interest, and you'll notice this even in movies where a lot of money goes into them. Batman vs. Superman, which came out last year, and Suicide Squad. Those are both movies that really suffered from pacing issues, both in different ways. There were a lot of elements that went into why neither of those movies were really considered very good, but pacing was a big one. I'm counting pacing as just one element, but we can really just bundle tonal consistency and just sort of the cohesiveness of the storytelling into this one element, since I'm sort of boiling everything down and simplifying it. But this is really a key one for me. There are plenty of movies that I like. I like the look of it, the production value, which we'll get into. But if the pacing's off, I may enjoy it on the first watch, but it's not going to hold my interest on multiple viewings, because I know what happens. There's not really a pace to the storytelling that sort of keeps me in my seat and invested in the movie. I just mentioned production value. When I say production value, I'm not necessarily talking about budget. There are plenty of really great movies that were done for very low budgets for their time, but I'm talking about value. Is the value there? Was the effort put in, or did things get half-assed? And really, this is a factor, because when the production elements are off, let's say the acting might be off, the sets might be odd looking or not really realistic or cheaply put together with maybe little effort. Basically, if all of the production elements really don't come together and really create this world that you're trying to delve into for an hour and a half or 2 hours, then that takes you out of it as well. So there's not really any movies that are going to achieve this level of greatness that we're going to talk about that skimped on production. And again, I'm not necessarily talking about money, because there are plenty of examples of movies done on a shoestring budget where all of the production elements were rounded off, they're well done, you forget that you're watching a movie and you can stay invested. And the fourth element of a good movie is one that I think about a lot personally, and that's good moments. These are quotes, your favorite scene in a movie, and even just small little elements that the story doesn't necessarily hang on, but that you remember and that you really like and appreciate. Really good storytellers are great about putting things like this all in. Not to keep hanging on superhero movies from last year specifically, but I do want to use examples that I know a lot of you have seen. Deadpool, considered one of the better movies from last year, has a lot of the same production elements, really a smaller budget, but a lot of the same production elements that Batman vs. Superman has, but it's a much better movie, and one of the reasons is because it has really good moments in it. It's funny, it's got a good script, the story was pretty good, but it's got some really clever little moments in there that you enjoy watching multiple times, and I think that's really a key player in whether a movie's really good or not, is that it earns those multiple viewings. And if it doesn't have these little gems peppered throughout, then it's really not worth multiple viewings. You might really like it on the first first time around, but the second, third time, let's say if you buy it on Blu-ray and you think it's one you want to watch a couple of times, you'll notice that you just sort of, the magic's not there for you, and it's because I think it's because you don't have those little moments to hang on to that you really like and appreciate. Now, as I said at the beginning, I don't think necessarily that a good movie is required to have all four of those elements down pat, but I really do think it needs at least three of the four in order to be a quote-unquote good movie. A lot of what we're talking about here is subjective, so let's just try to roll with it that if a movie's got bad production value and doesn't have good pacing, it's probably not a good movie. You might like it, it might be your cup of tea, but it's not a good movie that a lot of people appreciate. So now that we've covered the elements that make a movie good, what's that one thing that makes a movie great? For me, it's time and only time. Well, what does that mean? I do not think you can judge whether a movie is truly great when it's first released. You can think it's great, you can think it's, oh, that's my new favorite movie, but is it going to stand up to the test of time? Is it going to still be watched in 10, 20, 30 years from now? Most movies will not. These truly great movies will. They're going to hold an audience, and it's going to be because they have 3 or 4 of the elements we just talked about, and because they've stood the test of time, they've held their audience, they've held a consistent fan base. That really just comes down to how great that movie actually is. It's all the elements that go into it that determine whether or not it's something people are going to continue to enjoy to watch for years on their own life, for new generations to pick them up. Let's just talk about one of the greatest movies of all time, Citizen Kane. Most people watching this video, if not 100%, were not born when that movie came out or even close to when that movie came out, but it is still considered a very good movie by people in their 20s and 30s. Why? Because it is a solid movie. It's particularly a good movie for people that like filmmaking. They can see a lot of elements in it, but there's so many elements that went into making that movie good. The cinematography is amazing. It is a good story. The production value's there. It's got some good moments in it. It's enjoyable to watch. And it's sort of a piece of history that we can still, it's like a time machine that we can go back and look at. Indiana Jones, pick one. Maybe Temple of Doom you could skip as far as greatness goes, but Raiders of the Lost Ark, watched it 2 weeks ago, still a really great movie. The production value was there when it came out, and it holds up. Watching it today, you can see, some of the quote-unquote movie magic. Now that we know kind of how things are made, there's a little bit that's exposed there. So that's starting to become a little bit outdated, but the movie as a whole still holds up. It's fun to watch, has the moments, tells a good story, production value's there. The pacing's solid. It really doesn't drag, even in moments where there's not a lot of action. The characters are interesting. So that's a good example of one that has stood the test of time and is a great movie, and that clearly has all of the elements we're talking about. So you might be thinking, well, I disagree. Just to back up what I'm saying, let's take a look at these 2 different lists of movies. So look at both columns quickly, and just at a glance, scanning over them, which column do you think has more great movies in it? Both have good movies in them. I'm not going to argue that. I'm not saying one's got bad movies in it, but one of the columns probably stands out to you. Now, the column on the left is full of Academy Award nominees for Best Picture that did not win, and the column on the right are the ones that did win for those same years. Now, I assume most, if not all of you, picked the column on the left as the one that had more great movies in it. Point being, you cannot determine how great a movie is going to ultimately be the year it comes out. It really takes time for that to develop, and you can see that by looking at this list, and you can see that merely by the fact that how many great movies have come out in the last 2 years. It's hard to name any because not enough time has gone by. 10 years from now, I'm sure there are some movies that will come out over the next 12 months that will be considered great. It probably will only be a couple, but You need that time in order for them to sort of ferment and develop, and for audiences to really develop a greater and greater appreciation for them. So I really appreciate you watching this video, especially for watching the whole thing. If you liked it, please click the like button. It helps the video grow. It helps more people see it. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I'm going to be putting a new video out regularly. If you've got anything you'd like to see me do, please let me know in the comments below. I'm Darren with Flick Connection, and I'm out.